we're going to assemble this lovely clear acrylic rack and pinion steering mechanism. So we start with a tour of the parts. There's a bunch of little cut plastic parts, and then a bunch of these that need to be distinguished by length and thickness. So we have washers. There's thinner ones that are 3 millimeters, thicker ones that are 5 millimeters, and very, very thin ones. I call them gasket washers. They're just very thin. And there's 2 different kinds of nuts. There's a bunch of nuts that are all the same, and then there's 2 special ones. These are lock nuts. Keep them separate. And then for screws, there's 1 longest screw, 2 slightly shorter screws, 2 screws that are slightly shorter than that one, than those 2, and then a whole bunch, these are 3/4 inch, a whole bunch of that length, and then a bunch of the shortest screws. And particularly these are quite similar, so you want to be sure you sort them out and find a pair that are different first. Okay, so now we begin by assembling the 2 brackets that hold the wheels. Find 4 identical pieces here in clear plastic, and we want to take 2 of those and orient them the same way. See, they have sort of a crescent cutout. So we'll set one down, take one like this, and using this large group of sort of intermediate length screws, the longer of the 2 that come in a long group, put one up from the bottom, hold it with a finger, and one from the bottom here. And we're putting it through the 2 holes that are on the thicker side with the little cutout there. We set this down. Now we find a piece that looks like this. It's sort of like a portion of that piece, and it also has a scalloped cutout there. We want to set that on top so that those match up. Then we take these little thinnest gasket washers, very thin, put one on each screw, like that. And then we find these blue. These are actually sort of blue transparent plastic. They will come with paper film on, which you have to peel off. All this had to be peeled. And this will go on this way with the sort of rounded ball end on the same side as that scallop cutout that sits on top there. Now we have these smallest pieces. You'll see there's 2 different kinds. There's small and even smaller, and we'll need 1 of each. So this small piece, this second smallest piece, see the scalloped cutout is the same as what's underneath there. We want to set this on here in the same orientation. And this very smallest piece, we want to put it on this way, so the little step out thing is down and to the left. That goes on there. And you'll see they're free to turn. That's okay for right now. They can be loose there. Then we take more of these very thin gasket washers, 1 more on each of the screws, and then the second one of these with the cutout again down bottom, matching where it was, and stick that on there. And now we can put a nut on each one. We just want to put this nut on and spin it down. We should start. Okay, spin it down, but don't really tighten it. Second nut. Go in there. Now we want to find the pair that's the second longest. There's one that's even longer, but the 2 pair that's the longest pair. Take one of those, and it's going to go, we straighten these out, it's going to go in between those 2 pieces, like that. And it's supposed to be able to spin. It's supposed to be loose. But you can control how tightly it's held by the exact position of those pieces. And you can also sort of change the angle a little bit. So what we want to do is, holding that in place, set this down, get it all squared up. You sort of press it down, it'll be nice and square. And then use the screwdriver to tighten these sort of tight, not all the way tight yet. And then check that this is still spinning freely. So like right now, this is not spinning freely enough. but if I just sort of wiggle it a little bit, that'll push those out. I can push them back. Just kind of get it to where it has just enough play by alternately squeezing and wiggling. And it should also be sticking out parallel there. Once it's good, then tighten this the rest of the way. Get it nice and tight. Now the screw can come out, but it's going to need to be in there next time we use these, so you might as well just leave it in. Okay, so that's one. Now we need to make the second one, and we need to make the second one as a mirror image of this one. So start again with one of these, and instead of putting it this way, we'll put it this way, so it's mirrored from there. And again, two of these, not this length, but the slightly shorter one that there's more of. Two of those, one each in those holes, and set that facing up like that. Then two very thin washers, one on each screw. And then this piece with the cutout matching there. Then the lovely blue piece with the ball end on the bottom, like that. Then these two pieces, the very smallest pieces, again with first the crescent on the bottom, and then this piece oriented like that in there, and then very thin washer, another very thin washer, and this piece again crescent on the bottom, goes on like that. Nut, another nut, like that, and get them sort of just finger tight, and get those squared up, and then using this second longest screw, it's the same length as that one, in from the inside, and press it down, get it nice and squared up, and get that so it's the right amount of tightness, and then tighten these more, recheck, that one looks just about perfect, so we can tighten this the rest of the way. So now we have two mirror imaged wheel mount things. Okay, we're now ready to start assembling the main frame of this thing. There's two pieces that look like this. They're very similar, but you notice that one of them has these rectangular slots in it and the other one doesn't. And which one you start with first depends on whether you're assembling this kit for a standalone kit with just the steering wheel on a base, or whether you're assembling this to be part of the larger complete car kit. If you're assembling it for the car, you take the one first with if you're doing it for the car, you take the one without slots. If you're doing it for the standalone thing, you take the one with slots first. So we're going to do this as a standalone kit. So we'll put the one that does have slots down as our starting point. Now we're going to build up multiple layers, and we're going to do it without any screws in place, which is a little bit tricky. So we have to place everything gently. First we'll start with these assemblies. When we put them together, we ended up with them with the nuts on top, but we actually want to flip them over to have screws on top. So we flip them both over and put them on the other sides. This is how they're going to go. And they slide in. You see there's two gaps here. We start by sliding this part into the lower of the two gaps. And there's no screw here yet, so it just to sort of position it approximately there. And same on this side. So we have both of these sort of holding that up, roughly. Now we can start on these pieces. There's two pieces that look like this, one flimsy, one substantial. We put the flimsy one down first. And this is where it's a little tricky. We have to get it lined up with those holes, but not put any screws in yet. And then set this on top without shifting that around too much, and just kind of square it up approximately. And then same here. First the flimsy one. This circular cutout goes on top. And notice that the larger hole is on top, big hole on top, little hole on the bottom. If you have it backwards, flip it over. Okay, so again, these holes here need to line up. And then the thicker version of that part needs to go on top here and approximately line up. Okay, now this main rack gear, we can set it in place here. And then one of these 3mm washers, so that's the thinnest of the ones that are not the super thin ones, that drops in place right over that hole. And then this very thinnest washer goes on top. It doesn't actually matter what order you put them in. You could have the, except you can't drop it in there. You know what? Put it on the screwdriver. Stick the screwdriver in there and drop it down. So I do it. So now you have the thick washer, the 3mm washer, and the very thin washer on top of each other there, around that. Now we can put these connecting rods in, and we have to rotate this so it's about right. Drop that on, like that, and then same on the other side. Get it about right. Drop it on, and then it's in place. Okay. Now we want to do one last check to see if these are, to get them sort of close enough that all the holes are sort of showing, especially that guy. And drop this gear in. That one doesn't really matter where it is, it will stay in close enough. Now we take this top piece, big hole on top, and keeping it angled up a little so it doesn't disturb any of the other pieces, slide it in through the top pair. Hold that in place and set it down. Okay, now is where everything will come together. So now we take two of these shortest screws and we want to get them through those holes. But actually, it's easiest thing to do is take the screwdriver, because it's a little bit pointy, and push it through the hole, and that will kind of get everything lined up if it's not perfect yet. And then you can drop the screw, and it should go all the way through. And then do the same on the other side. Now we've got that lined up. That screw will go through. And then this one, again, use the screwdriver to get it lined up first, and then drop one of the shortest screws through, like that. Okay, now these two holes up here, again, get them lined up with the screwdriver first, and they're going to get actually the slightly longer screws, the screws that are the same length as we used on the outsides there. So we drop one through there, and one through there. Okay, this thing is now stable. If you're going to have trouble, it will be these little pieces shifting around before you get the screws through. But once the screws are dropped in there, nothing bad can happen. So next we got two more screws to put through. These are not so finicky, because they can be slid around and they all move together. So put that screw there and this screw through there. So now we have 7 screws, all of which need nuts. So we lift, and here we want to be very careful, lift from the very bottom, because if you lift any of the higher layers, it's just all going to fall apart. So lift it up and turn it 90 degrees, not upside down, because then it will fall apart. And these two are actually not going to get nuts yet. You'll see why in a minute. But the bottom 3, we put nuts on them. So just spin it on, and don't tighten it yet. The one in the middle gets a nut. And this other one on the bottom gets a nut. and then these two, the outer two on the top, they get the lock nuts. So these lock nuts are slightly thicker. They have a little ring on top and a little piece of plastic that binds with the threads. So we want to put them on with the plastic side facing away from the screw. So they will spin on initially very easily, just like a regular nut, but then fairly soon they stop turning. And for right now, we'll leave them at that point. Push this through and put the other lock nut on the end of this one. By the way, at this point, if you let these screws fall out, you can't get them back in again, and you'll have to start over. So that's why I wanted to make sure these screws were in. And that screw fell out, but that's not the end of the world, because it'll go right back in again. Okay, so now it's time to tighten these 3 screws. And what we want to do is, actually it's not time to tighten the screws. Now it's time to put the base on. So to put the base on, we will set this aside and get the 3 pieces for the base. So these 2 pieces are identical, just one of them has the logo on it there, the name. Doesn't really matter how you put it together, but this also is symmetrical, so you can put it either way. Put those 2 together, take a nut and slide it through this T-slot. It should not take much force. If you're pushing very hard, it's because the nut isn't rotated correctly. You want to have the 2 flat sides going in parallel there. And sometimes they're so loose that they fall out. This one happens to be sticking a little bit. Just depends on how the plastic was cut exactly. So one of the shortest screws goes in. Tighten that down. Put another nut through there. Piece, another of the shortest screws goes in there. Okay, so once you have the base put together like this, then we'll want to put 4 nuts into the T-slots at the top. And if you're lucky enough that they hold themselves in place, this is easy. If your piece of plastic happens to be loose, then you'll have to be sort of careful that they don't fall out as you're putting this all together. I've got ones that are relatively snug in there. Sometimes you actually have to push them in, but usually they're fairly loose. And if you're pushing very hard, it's because they're not rotated correctly. If you try to put them in an angle, they won't. So here one of them is loose, the other 4 are kind of holding in place. Okay, so now we have that set up, and we have these 4 tabs here. Those 4 tabs are going to fit into these 4 slots on the bottom. I don't want to turn it upside down so the screws don't fall out. So we set this down, and they won't line up at first because there's some flex to this. But if we just sort of gently push it a little bit, okay, now all 4 have gone into place. And these 2 screws, which we put in earlier but didn't put nuts on, those actually connect up with the nuts down there. So we can now screw that down, tighten it, and we can take 2 more of that same 3/4 inch length of screw, put them in there. Okay. Now that we've got those in place, we can adjust this and tighten the remaining screws. Now, this screw here, how smoothly and loosely this moves depends on exactly how you tighten that screw. So I would just start by just tightening it and then see, does this move easily? If you find that it sort of binds and doesn't move easily, it's probably because this washer is a little bit too low down relative to this piece here. And that's sort of normal. It's designed to have some flex to it. And you can adjust that by loosening these screws and just sort of wiggling it a bit to bump that washer away and then retightening it. Okay, so once you have this the way you want it, go ahead and tighten these screws. So we've tightened those 4, that one, and those. The only ones we haven't tightened yet are these 2, because those have lock nuts. So we have to use the wrench to tighten those, because at this point we can't finger tighten it anymore. So we hold the wrench on there and get the screwdriver here, and we have to turn. It takes a good bit of turning, a good bit of force to overcome the lock nut, and that's meant to be that way. It's a lock nut after all. I'm just doing a bad job of holding it. So we're going to keep turning. Now we don't want to turn too far. It doesn't actually matter how far you turn it because it's held in place by the plastic, not by the screw, in terms of the up and down direction. So you just want to get it until it's all the way on there, but still has movement. You don't want to clamp this down. If you clamp it down at all, it will not move freely. So now we go over here and do the other one. This will take quite a bit of turning. If you have a bigger screwdriver, feel free to use the bigger screwdriver, but be careful not to over tighten things then. Okay, so again we have some wobble there. Okay, next we can attach the steering wheel. So we take the longest screw and one of these, that's slightly longer, the shortest, the thin 3mm washer is next. Goes on that. And then this screw goes up from below through the middle of that pinion gear. This is a rack and pinion gear system. So using a finger to hold that in place. Then we take the 5mm washer. That goes on the top there, and it goes into that larger hole so that that's sort of clamping that gear. Then we take a nut, spin the nut down, and then tighten this sandwich with either the screwdriver or a wrench or both if you like. And this should be able to turn like that. And we take another nut, spin that part way down like that, and find the steering wheel. And put another nut on here. And now you can be as obsessive as you want about this, trying to get the orientation of the steering wheel centered when this is steering straight. So you won't be super obsessive about it. But once you have it the way you like, then you can use 2 wrenches to get that nice and tight. Now you can steer it with the steering wheel. Now we need to put the wheels on. So with these screws here, take one of the 5mm washers, and that screw wants to escape, so we'll let it apply that on, and put a nut on. We want to spin this until it stops, and then back up about half a turn, so that there's some wobble to this. It's very important there be some wobble because this screw has to turn. That's the axle, it has to turn in that mounting there. And then we get the wheels. Put one wheel on, put another nut on there, get that finger tight, and then use 2 wrenches to fully tighten that. And then check again that this spins freely. It should be completely loose and free spinning. Do the other side, a 5mm washer. Finger there to keep it. Another nut. Spin down until it's touching, and then back off a little. Put the wheel on. And another nut. And tighten it. And that is now finished. So we have a complete rack and pinion steering system. You can see how it works. The pinion gear pushes the rack back and forth, and then these connecting rods push that back and forth. Now, if you built this for the car kit, we would have interchanged the top and bottom panels, because these tabs and slots here, they hold the base for a standalone, but for the car kit, they come in from the top instead. And that's why there's the difference in the order. There you go.